Hello everyone, I hope everyone is well. As far as Pinchas, hopefully you can say an idea. To be very honest, I didn't get a chance to really frame my thoughts properly. So I will ask the questions, and Bez Hashem we can speak out the idea in proper formation to get an insight into the parsha and into life, as always. So this week's parsha said, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, Heishiv es Chamasim el bnei Yisrael. So in other words, Pinchas ben Elazar HaKohen, so he was Meishiv the Chema, Mel bnei Yisrael, Bekana es Kinasi B'Sechem. So he avenged my vengeance among them, V'lo Chelisi es bnei Yisrael b'Kinasi. I did not wipe out the Jewish people in my vengeance. Okay. So as the pasuk is saying. All right, so let's just understand the pasuk of the pasuk. So essentially, the pasuk is saying like this: Pinchas did a maisa, and that maisa which Pinchas did was a maisa which basically quieted or took away God's anger from the Jewish people, and as a result of that fact, he is now being rewarded. And he's getting kahuna, and that's what's happening. So that's very interesting. So now, what else? The Gemara, I thought Rashi brought it here as well. I don't see it here. Okay, but the Gemara in Sanhedrin, let's pull it up, because the Gemara in Sanhedrin is very revealing on this week's parsha. It gives a lot of details and some very interesting ideas. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin says the following. It says that Pinchas ben Elazar HaKohen, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu hakdim lo yishalom. So it says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him to makdim shalom to him. And it also says, as you see here in front of you, it says it's befitting for this kapara that Pinchas did. It's befitting for it to be mechaper forever. And so you see, it's a very interesting idea here that this was apparently an extremely high level or high consequence thing, Maisa, that occurred. And we also know, of course, the famous Chazal that says that Pinchas was Eliyahu Navi, and Eliyahu Navi lived for, if that's true, then he lived for hundreds of years, and he became a Navi later on, etc., etc. And therefore, it's you have that, and then you have the Gemara. There's a drasha by in Sefer Yehoshua. It says that when the two spies were sent, Kalev and Pinchas, and they were in the woman's home, it says that when the guards came knocking at the door of the woman's home, it says that the woman took the men vatitzpeno, and she hid him. And Chazal ask, what does it mean that she hid him? That's a singular language. Simply speaking, it has to be that you should have said vatitzpenein, because it's two people, Pinchas and Kalev. So Chazal answered that Pinchas himself did not need to be hidden because he had this ability to be unseen, because he transformed into some sort of malachic state. So it's just very interesting to understand that this was the result on a personal level of Pinchas for what he did. Now, the shaila really is just on the pashut shot of what's occurring here, is that it seems to be that this. Well, let's go like this. The reality of what the pasuk is saying doesn't make any sense, because if you review the story is that many people were having relations with the non-Jewish woman, and then they were bowing down to idols, and that was a lot of many Jews were doing that. And then there was one Jew who came in front of Moshe and he said, is this mutter or aser? is this woman mutter aser, and then you have the whole story where Moshe doesn't remember the halacha, and then Pinchas kills the nasi. It was the nasi of Shevet Midian, of Shevet Shimon. So the point is that, simply speaking, the Maisa of Pinchas was that he killed one couple who was doing this incorrect thing, and he was showing, and therefore it was like Kilu showing that it was wrong, that they shouldn't have done it. So, I mean, l'chayra, it's hard to understand the simple pshat of the pasuk. The pasuk is saying that Pinchas was the one who was meishiv the chema. He took away or returned God's anger from upon the Jewish people because of what he did. What are we talking about over here? We know that 24,000 people actually did die. That's the end of last week's parsha. And Pinchas killed, one of the couples that were doing this incorrect thing. He murdered because of kanai poginbo. So, how is it true? In what sense does it make to say that Pinchas caused God's anger to be taken away? He killed one couple, and 24,000 other people died, and those people died because they also did the incorrect Maisa. So there was a wrong Maisa done. God punished the people who did it. 24,000 people were killed, and then Pinchas also happened to have killed this one couple. Okay, I understand that. It was a high profile person who was doing it that Pinchas killed. Okay, that's I hear, but that doesn't make sense still to characterize it that Pinchas was the one through this Maisa who solved the entire issue. It doesn't seem logical. That's just a question on the simple pshat of the pasuk. Why is the pasuk saying that Pinchas was the one who achieved this appeasement of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? It was the fact that the people who did it actually died in the Magefa, etc. That's kasha number one. Kasha number two is, even if you're someone to answer that question, it doesn't, the extremity of the response to this doesn't really seem appropriate. In other words, we know that Pinchas was zocheh from here to a dinner for kehuna. He was zocheh to become a kohen, and we know, and we showed here the Chazal. It says that this kapara that Pinchas did is roy to mechaper forever. So, why is that true? I mean, he did a Maisa at one point in history, which perhaps it was a Kiddush Hashem. That's fine. Let's say that. Why is that true that it's roy to mechaper forever? It doesn't really seem to make any sense. So, those are really the two essential questions, and we're gonna read a little bit more of the Gemara, and we'll see. Ask me a few more questions, then we'll try to speak out an idea. The Gemara says that it says like this. Here's what Pinchas did. He said, "Ba v'chabatan lifnei makom." So after stabbing Zimri and Kasbi, he threw them onto the floor before God, and he's Amar Lefan Ribbon Shalom. He said before him, he said, Ribbon Shalom, Al Elu Yiplu Esrim Varba Elef Mi Yisrael. Is it on these two people, on Kasbi and Zimri, who did this act, on this, because of this, 24,000 Jews died. Shinamar V'Yamesa Magefa B'Yam V'Esrim Aleph. It was 24,000 people that died. V'Haynu Dichsiv. This is what it says. V'Yamot Pinchas V'Yifalel. So Amar Lazar V'Yispalel Lo Nemar. It doesn't say that Pinchas davened. Elo V'Yifalel. Rather, it says he was mefalel. What does that mean? Melamed Kaviyachol teaches us Shasu Plilus in Kono. And Rashi tells us, what does that mean? That means he did a reeve. He fought. Plilus, Rashi says, reeve. So it means he was arguing. He was fighting with God. He was saying, God, why did you, for these two people, you're going to murder 24,000 Jewish people because of this? And so Big Shemach Hasharas to Dachfos, the Machasharas wanted to push him away. So Amar Lahan, so he said to them, Manichulo, leave him be. Leave Pinchas be. Kanai ben Kanai hu. Meishiv Chei ben Meishiv Chema. So this Gemara seems to make no sense. What's being said over here? What's being said is that Pinchas fought with God, and he said, well, God, how can you kill, not how can you, but on this, you're going to kill 24,000 people? It makes it sound like, again, seemingly incorrect, according to the simple reading of the Chumash. It makes it sound like the entire reason for the Magefa was the fact that Zimri and Kasbi, were having relations. that's just not true. We know that there was many, many, many other people who were doing this as well. I mean, it's very hard to understand what is Pinchas saying. What is he fighting with God about? Saying on this 24,000 people are dead. What do you mean on this? It's not on this. It's on all the other people who are doing it as well. There was many, many, many other people who were doing this avera. It says in last week's parsha, it says Vayechel, Vayashev Yisrael Bashitim, Vayachel Ha'amis Nosal Benos Moav. That's not describing one person. That's many people. So, what is Pinchas talking about? On this, 24,000 people will die. It's not on this. It's on all those other people as well. It's for the whole thing. The whole fact that the Jewish people at that time were doing this. That's why they died, not because of this, not because of Cosby and Zimri. So that's really, I think, that's really the last kasha over here. And in order to answer this question, to try to give an understanding of the nature of kanos. And the nature of kanos is a very, very fascinating thing. Let's see where it is over here in the Gemara. Okay, so here we go. So the Gemara says the following. The Gemara says that where is it? I'm trying to find it. The Gemara says, okay, let me 10 more seconds. If I don't find it, I'll just quote it. Okay, I can't seem to find it at the moment. But the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says that the nature of kanos and the nature of what Pinchas was doing was that he was acting upon the idea of kanan pagin boy. And the Gemara basically says that if Zimri would have turned around and he would have killed Pinchas. Here it is, found it. Okay. So, like this. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Habali Malich, if one, Rashi says, if a Kanai Habali Malich Bezdin, Uvishas Maisim Yifga Boy. So let's say a Kanai, someone who's a Kanai, comes to Bezdin and it's happening, right? So someone is being boiled on a ramis right now. And a guy comes to Bezdin and he says, Bezdin, what should I do? Should I kill him? So the halacha is, Ein Marin Loi. We do not tell him to actually kill him. Okay, that's one level. Itmar Nami, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, so not only do we not direct the individual to act upon his kanos to kill the boil aramis, even more than that, El Shim Peras Zimri B'Haragei Pinchas Neragalav. If, let's say, Zimri would have let's say he would have realized someone was coming and he would have stepped away from Cosby, and then Pinchas would have killed him, so Pinchas would have been put to death as a result of that action. Or Nepach Zimri, if Zimri would have turned around, Varaga the Pinchas, and he would have killed Pinchas, Ein Neragalav. He would not have been killed for killing Pinchas. Sharei Roidefu, because he's a Roidef. Because Pinchas is a Roidef. So essentially what's being said over here is something which is extremely, extremely rare and very hard to understand, which is like this. Even though it's true that there is an idea, and the idea is a boil aramis kana and pagin boy, someone who is having relations with a non-Jewish woman. If you're a kana, you should be pagay him. You should kill him. That's the rule. Now you come on to a fascinating idea over here, which is that even though that's true, that is an idea, a fact. In the actual halacha, we would never tell someone to do that, and he does not have any level of protection in terms of the actual ma'aser that he's doing when he goes to kill the person who is being ba'al the aramis. So what does that mean? It's a place which is very hard to understand in halacha. And if I'm supposed to do it, then why won't Bezdin tell me to do it? And if I'm supposed to do it, why am I considered a rodef? I thought I'm supposed to do this, and if I'm not supposed to do it, so then how do you have the halacha? So it's hard to understand. The geder of kanai is almost impossible to understand. It's saying that you should do it, but Bezdin won't tell you to, and you're doing it entirely at your own risk, so that if you start running towards him with the spear, or if, let's say, in modern times, if you would shoot the bullet, and then before the bullet hit his head, he would immediately step away from the woman and stop doing it, and it killed him, you would be killed for that. Meaning that you have no sanction by halacha. Halacha is not sanctioning you whatsoever. Yet, it's a halacha. So how does that work? What does that mean about the nature of the concept of kanai and pogin bo? That's really the shaila. And the answer to that shaila, I believe, will answer our other questions. And in order to answer this question, we'll go to a very fascinating idea. And this fascinating idea is that there is a concept of a halacha Moshe Sinai regarding this inyan, which is what it is. It's actually very fascinating that if we look at the lashon here, the lashon of the Gemara is like this. The lashon of the Gemara is Amar Loi. This is Pinchas talking to Moshe Rabbeinu. Amar Lo, Achi Avi Abba, the brother of my father's father, my grandfather's brother, or my great uncle. Lo kachli matani beridettecha mehar Sinai. Did you not teach me this when you came down from Har Sinai? Habayel rames kanai pagin bo. So the emphasis here on kachli matani beridettecha mehar Sinai bothers me. What is Pinchas telling Moshe? What does that mean? When else would he have taught Pinchas the halacha if not when he came down from Har Sinai? Moshe taught the entire Torah when he came down from Har Sinai. Obviously, he did it when he came down from Har Sinai. What does he mean? Lo kachli matani. And in addition to that, Rashi emphasizes this point by saying this. Nis'ami menu halacha. Rashi says, Nis'ami menu halacha. It's very hard to understand. Hopefully we'll say an answer. Rashi says, Nis'ami menu halacha. Shenemar loy besinai habayel kusis v'chulu. So Rashi is showing you that he understood the point. He saw our kasha. Rashi is telling you, Shenemar loy besinai. What is Rashi doing? Who cares? Well, I mean, where else would he have learned the halacha from? Obviously, Moshe learned all the halachas from Sinai. So clearly, Rashi wants something with this. That it was told to him in Sinai that kanai pogin bo. What does Rashi want with that? Why is it important that it's in Har Sinai? So the answer to the question is the following, and that is that, as is very well known, the word halacha comes from the word halicha, which means walking, going forward, development. And that concept is that in halacha, the point of it, the simple understanding of it, is that it is meant to direct and show, as the lashon of Torah, what Torah is, how the Jewish people, how to be holich, how to go forward, how to develop, how to, basically how to be proper Jews, and to go further in their mission of being in a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and doing the mitzvahs, etc. Now, that concept of halacha, in its most general and almost always form, is chal on, it speaks to maisa, which is action. So the halacha is you do this, the halacha is you don't do this, the halacha is you do that. However, there are instances in which the halacha is actually only going to speak to the reality of an emotion, which means that, and this is the chiddush, the geder, this is the idea of the concept of the halacha of kanai and pogin bo. The geder, the halacha of kanai and pogin bo, is not a halacha that speaks to any level of action. It rather speaks to a level of emotion. In other words, if a person is in the point of his development in which his relationship with God is such that when he sees an atrocity occurring against God, and the fact that, or to put it in a different way, the fact of what is occurring chases God out of the world due to the immoral or wrong nature of the action occurring, if that bothers him to the point that he will now act on behalf of God, he does this. But the halacha is only speaking to the emotional / developmental level of the individual. Now, obviously, if that's the only point in which halacha is speaking to, it's impossible to make that any standard, because different people are holding at different stages. And a person can be a fake kanai, he can be a real kanai, or he can just not be holding at all. This is the reason, this is the obvious understanding of the fact that two things this explains. The first thing it explains is why ein Myron Kane. The idea of Myron Kane, if Bezdin directs you to do something, it means that Bezdin is telling you that this is the appropriate thing to do on a generic level. In terms of the overall development of Klal Yisrael, this is something that you should do. This is a halacha. This is a halicha. This is where you should be going. This is how you should move forward. That is not true, because if something is dependent on a person's personal point of development, it can't possibly be made standard to the point where it can be paskin by Bezdin. That's the first thing. Second thing is that because the halacha is actually only chal, it only speaks to the reality of the emotion that's occurring, and it tells you how to correctly channel that emotion, that doesn't sanction the actual maisa that's being done. It only all that it does is it says, if you're a kanai, then you can be pogeya. So, in other words, the nafkamina of which is that if all the conditions happen, you won't be put to death if you did it as a kanai, assuming that you actually were a kanai, and assuming that he wasn't pirish, etc., etc. So that's the nafkamina of that. But the actual maisa level of the halacha of kanai and pagin bo is not a halacha, which is why the Gemara tells you that if Zimri would have been pirish, or if Zimri would have turned around and killed Pinchas in self-defense, he would have been fine. Or Pinchas would have been killed for killing him if he would have not been doing the maisa at the time that Pinchas killed him. That's because the actual physical action that's taking place in Kanai and Pogin Bo is not halachic, because the halacha is only speaking to an emotional reality of the person who simply can't hold himself back when he sees the atrocity taking place. And what it says is, if you do this, this is within the geder of halacha. It's okay. We're not going to kill you for killing this man if he was in the middle of having relations with a non-Jewish woman. That's what the halacha says. And what that really means is, to really get to the depth of that yesod, is that, and this is simply speaking what Pinchas is really saying, is that the issue, the chema, the anger that the Ribono Shel Olam had with the Jewish people was isolated to the Maisa of Zimri. Why is that? Because if we are to understand that essentially there is one essential difference between what Zimri was doing and between what everyone else was doing. In terms of a nation, if you have a bunch of individuals within that nation defecting and doing things that are wrong, that does not mean that the nation is experiencing a tragedy. It just means that individuals in that nation are defecting, and because of their individual choices, they're making wrong choices, and okay, it is what it is. That does not mean that the entire nation development is at risk, or that something is negative happening on a national level, because it's not a national occurrence which is occurring that is detracting from it. It's just a bunch of different individuals who, don't have the capacity to adhere and to be part of the standard of the overall nation. But therefore, in that scenario, that wasn't the cause of the Megeifa at all. For that, the Torah says that Hashem commanded Moshe that they should be judged. In other words, they should go through the court. They should be, accordingly, they should be put to death by the Dayanim. However, what Zimri did, and this goes back to the Besodam al Tavo Nafshi Uvikalam al Techad Kivodi, which is the Maisa of Zimri and the Maisa of Korach, and they share the same underlying foundational issue, as we explained in Parshas Korach, that they're associated and put together in the pasuk, and that is that. Let's read the Gemara, and you'll see clearly what I'm saying. Vayomer Moshe Shovti Yisrael. So halach shivto shel Shimon. So the tribe of Shimon went Eitzel Zimri ben Salu. They went to Zimri ben Salu, and Zimri ben Salu was their nasi. He was their head. Amrulo. They said to him, Hein danen dine nefashos ve'ata yoshev v'shosek. He said, look what's happening to the people of your tribe. They're being judged and they're being put to death for doing this thing, and you're sitting and doing nothing. Me'asa, what did he do? Amar v'kibet esen v'arba elef miYisrael v'alach eitzel kazbi. By the way, this 24,000 mistama is the same 24,000 that died, and he went eitzel kazbi. So what do you see clear from these lines of Gemara is a very fascinating thing, and it's exactly what the same thing with the same idea of Korach. That is that Zimri ben Salu wasn't even doing the Maisa. He wasn't involved. He was the Nasi. He was a very high level, very kosher, l'chayra, very spiritual, a big tzaddik. He was the Nasi of the whole Shevet. But they went to him and they told him, how could you stand by and watch the people of your tribe being killed? And as a result, as a conceptual Maisa, he didn't have any taiva for the woman of Midian. As a conceptual hashkafic understanding of reality, he went ahead and he took Kazbi, and then he brought it to Moshe, etc. So what that means is, and what you see clearly over here is that, and this is themed in the same reason that Shimon killed, and Shimon and Levi killed all the people of Shem, and they said Hakezonoya asas achuseinu, meaning that there is an underlying priority for them that their people, the people of Yisrael themselves should not be killed or should not be raped, etc., etc. And that misaligned loyalty to their own people is what causes these problems. And kafi what we explained by Korach as well, it applies here. But Ayin Sham, it's too long to get into that. The point is that Zimri went ahead and he gathered the 24,000 people, and then he came up to Moshe and he essentially was attempting to make a statement that the thing that was being done was not just a indulgence that was being indulged by a group of individuals. It rather was a Maisa which is okay, correct, and it should be and could be done, and nothing should be done about it. That's what he was trying to do. He was trying to instill the reality of that Maisa, of having relations with a non-Jewish woman, as being a totally okay thing to do. And Memela, you now understand that this was the cause of the Chema. This was the cause of the Ketzef of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why is that? Because as we've spoken about until now, the reality of people, individual people, doing things that are negative or giving in to their indulgences is not ba'atzem a chilul Hashem. It doesn't inherently take away from the level of awareness, the level of relationship that the Jewish people as a whole have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But when you gather 24,000 people and you do a Maisa in front of all of those people for the sake of the display that the thing that you're doing, there's nothing wrong with it, you're essentially threatening on an existential level the relationship that the Jewish people have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if what you do actually works. Because, as we know, Baal Aramis, someone has relations with a non-Jewish woman, it's Kilu Aved Avodah Zarah, etc., etc. It takes away from the entire, even physically, biologically, it takes away from the entire concept of the mission of Yisrael. Because obviously, if all Jewish people had married non-Jews throughout history, there would just be no more Jews left. So the whole thing is impossible. But even ideologically as well, we're not going to get into that whole discussion right now. But the point is, the concept remains and is true that if you are trying to be matir it, therefore that is what would make it that there is a ketzef in Israel, that God would be angry with the Jewish people. And it's the same yesod as the hakhel idea by Korach, that there is you gather a large amount of people. In this case, Korach gathered all the Jewish people almost. Here he gathered 24,000 people. And he was essentially attempting to make a display and to imprint upon the entire chefza of the Jewish identity that this was okay, and that this was a thing that you can do. And he was trying to do that by gathering, by bringing together the 24,000 people, and then by doing it in front of Moshe, and then everyone just, basically lowering the entire standard of the Jewish people to the point where this would be sanctioned. And that's what it says. By the way, just if you want to understand the proof of this idea that it's individual actions by the individuals that were doing it was not the problem, it's a very interesting lashon over here that the Gemara uses. It says that Pinchas was going into the tents where they were doing this terrible thing, and so he said to them, okay, so Amr Hanichulo, they said, the guards of the tents said to, they said to him, let Pinchas go in. Afhu la'asos tzirachav nichnas. He too has come in to do his needs. And Rashi says tzirachav is tashmish. That's referring to relations. So in other words, even the Gemara, or at least it's characterizing it from the point of view of the people who were doing it, that they viewed it as tzirachav, as needs. In other words, they had a sexual need and they were fulfilling that sexual need. That's how they viewed it. But that's really the main point. In contrast to it being a hashkafic thing, which you see that it was by the fact that, according to the Gemara, Zimri wasn't involved or doing it, but they just came up to him and he was doing it as a maisa to stand up for his shevet, which goes back to the incorrect perspective with Besodama Tovanafshi by Yaakov. Okay, so l'chara, where this leaves us is that is the avla of Shimon and of the Maisa of what was going on, and that is why there is a ketzef. And Memela, we can now perhaps get an understanding that the entire yesod, the entire way in which the Jewish people would have gotten the anger of HaKadosh Baruch Hu off of them it would no longer suffice for there to be a maisa, an action of punishment to those who did the wrongdoing. Because a punishment of action to those who did the wrongdoing only suffices if what they were doing is simply a wrong action. But if the action that they were doing it wasn't the action at all that was important, but rather it was the statement that was to be inferred from the fact that the action was being done, in order to create an imprint on the overall communal Jewish identity and subconscious, then it wouldn't suffice for there to just be an action done to these people, or an action done to Zimri, for him to be killed. Rather, what it took was a display of somebody whose entire being was he just wanted to be in a world and to make it that this is a world in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu can be. what I just said is the simplest touch of the idea of a Kiddush Hashem. The idea of a Kiddush Hashem is the reality of someone behaving and existing in a manner in which, because of the way that he is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can be in this world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu can be seen, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can be recognized, etc., etc., etc. That is the touch of Kiddush Hashem. And as is very well known, that Chilul comes from the lashon of Chalo, which means hollow. And the concept of Chilul Hashem is essentially you hollow out, you make empty the world from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence. So that's a simple understanding. You understand when someone gives back money, etc. All these stories of Kiddush Hashem essentially is you can see based off somebody's actions that he is aware of and has regard for the fact that there is a God in the world. And the idea of that is that that was needed on very, very high and visible display in this moment because of the Chil Hashem that was occurring, because of what the Nasi of what the Shevet of Shimon was doing. And therefore, it's beautiful. The only thing that could have fixed an issue which the entire problem with what was happening was not in the actions is something which, when you do it, the action that you're doing is completely unsanctioned, but it's only as a result of the fact that it's simply the reality of what you are that you have to do this. And therefore, what you're doing is you're personifying, essentially, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's really what's being done. In other words, when the pasuk says "Bekanoi es kinasi," that Pinchas, Rashi says what he was mekana, the kina that I should have been mekana. Let's see the Rashi inside. Rashi says "Benakmoi es nikmasi." Rashi says "Bekatzboi," when he was upset, es haketzef, the anger, shehaya li liktov, that I should have been angry. So that's essentially what's going on. In other words, Pinchas is kavayachol, taking the place of the Ribbon Shalom in the world at this moment to take away and to totally break down and remove a reality which was occurring because of the result of an action that Zimri was doing. And therefore, that explains the extremity of the reward and response that Pinchas got. We have to understand that the level that Pinchas was on is not that he saw something, intellectually processed that something wrong was occurring, then made an intellectual decision to take an action to correct the wrongdoing. That is not at all what occurred over here. What occurred over here was that Pinchas had developed a reality of a self that was so in tune with HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he simply could not live in an existence in which the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu was being chased out and violated by someone who was trying to make a statement which would completely remove the Jewish people from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is what was going on. It was a completely reactionary response from Pinchas' point of view. That is the whole point. Ein marin lekein. You can't intellectually decide to be a Kanai. Either you did it or you didn't do it. If you ask Bezdin, Bezdin's not going to tell you to do it. Because the fact that you asked, that already puzzles you. It's not about it. It's not about whether it's objectively, theoretically the correct or incorrect thing to do. It's about an emotional response based off a level that someone is on. And therefore, when Pinchas does this Maisa, what he becomes is a major vehicle of Kiddush Hashem and of the expression of the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to the Jewish people and to the world by virtue. And therefore, that explains the extremity of the response here, of the fact that as a result of this, he's Zocha to Kehuna. And as a result of this, according to the Medrash, he becomes Eliyahu Navi. And by the way, it's not a coincidence they say it. We know that by Eliyahu Navi, when he speaks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he goes on and on about the fact that the Jewish people are worshipping Avodah Zarah, and he simply can't handle it, and he's Mekana, the kin of Hashem. If you look in Melachim, you'll see all these similar Lashonos by Eliyahu Navi, and It's to the point that at that stage in history, Eliyahu Navi starts, bashing, and he starts putting down the Jewish people and saying how much they were doing wrong, and therefore Hakadosh Baruch Hu, after trying to hint to him that he should, the opposite, he should try to be mizaki and try to find schus with Jewish people. After Eliyahu Navi did not get that hint, or he got it but he couldn't, it wasn't what he was, Hakadosh Baruch Hu took him away. He took him out of history, and he put him, he became Eliyahu Navi, or he became, he was Ola in the Rechev, in the fiery chariots, etc. But it's very, if you look at the Rashis in Malachim, you'll see that's what happened. That Eliyahu Navi was so in tune and so simply living in reality of the truth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's existence, he mamish could not handle and could not process the idea of the fact that the Jewish people were worshipping idols, and therefore he was no longer able to serve as a Navi, the job of whom is to lead the Jewish people in the process of their development to get to, the end result. But in order to do that, you need to have the tolerance for the thing that they're doing. If you don't have the tolerance anymore, then there's no point of you functioning as a Navi for them. So therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu removed him. But the idea and the concept of what he was claiming and tinying as Eliyahu Navi is extremely similar and extremely in line with the entire concept of the kina over here. Okay.